Good morning. Happy Wednesday. I am going to start right away so I don't take a ton of your time today. I want you to have a chance to process the story that you read yesterday. I'm going to help you with your assignment that's in Schoology. And I want to just talk today about some really unique techniques that this author is using in this piece of literature. It'll also really help you as you prepare for your literary final projects, which we talked about last week. Next week, we'll walk into step 2 of those projects. So you've already finished step 1. If you haven't, go out and do that and go watch the video and then get into Schoology and answer those questions. And then next week, we'll move to that next step 2 of the project and you'll start doing some drafting. But what you'll be doing is really looking at all of these elements that we've been working on in our videos over this quarter with the different pieces of literature. So for the leap, which is what we'll be talking about today, this is really our last chance to practice together and walk through it, look at some features, highlight some areas, process what we're thinking together in the analysis as we're answering those questions. Because then you're going to do that on your own with your own piece of literature that you've selected. That you hopefully have sent me information about in Schoology so I know what it is that you'll be analyzing. Let's go ahead and get started. When we look at the short story of the leap, I'll bring it up here for you just to jog your memory. This did come in your email this week. It was attached as a PDF. You can also find it in your online textbook. Remember, if you go out to your collections account, you can find it there. And what I like about the online collections book is you can press the audio and listen to it as you read, and that helps us a lot. Our author today is Louise Erdrich, and what we know about her is this short story in particular is not her usual genre. That's, I think, why I like it, is she's really stepped out of her comfort zone as a writer and an author. She usually writes a lot of her novels and her poetry are usually about her own culture and her growing up. She does write some nonfiction passages and some memoir pieces sort of similar to what you wrote. And as we're reading this short story, it feels like a memoir, right? Doesn't it feel like this moment that she's writing about? But in all actuality, remember, this is fiction. It's fake, it's phony, it's made up, it's the author's imagination. And I think one of the pieces that we can tell it's good writing is because we feel like it's real. One of the most popular pieces that she's really known for that you may possibly read later on in your high school English career is the book called The Round House, which is a Native American genre. And that is one that she has received actually a lot of acclaim for and praise. And there's also a lot of controversy about it. So you may hear about that again later on, or in this particular author. This piece of fiction, The Leap, which you've already read yesterday, and I know you've answered some vocabulary questions as you worked through, what words is this author choosing for us as we start to let the plot unfold and develop. So since you've worked on the vocab, now we're going to get into the analysis part of this story. And I want to take a moment to just start with the very beginning. You've read it, and now we're going to talk about how the author introduces that. The first thing she does for us is she says, "My mother is the surviving half of a blindfold trapeze act. Not a fact, I think, about much even now that she is sightless. The result of encroaching and stubborn cataract." So right away we know this little piece of her mom, this crazy story, like not many people would look at someone and go, "Oh, I bet that blind person was a trapeze artist." So we already have this, hopefully this hook that's pulling us in. And then we're going to want to read about this woman and her mother, and hopefully we're going to get the whole picture, okay, and how she feels about her mom, what that meant to her growing up, and just a little story about who her mom is and what her mom has taught her through life and the experience. Once we start reading, you're often taking notes on the plot development. You're doing your leveled reading notes, your 2 column notes, which I'm not checking, so it's not that you need to be doing those, but they do help you process. That's why we practiced them earlier in the year. But once you've read it, you'll notice in Schoology you have a set of questions out here. And if we look at those questions, it says here, identify the leaps in the story. So which leaps are literal? Literal means they actually happened. They're real. Figurative, and we talk all the time in literature about figurative language. So figurative means like on a different level. Think of the symbolism that's taking place. That's what a figurative example might be. So think about those in the story. And then it says, how do lines 15 to 21 act as a flashback? Well, we've talked about flashback this year, but let's take a look at this piece and see, how does it act as a flashback? So in lines 15 to 21, we'll dig in here. So we know there's 10, 11, 12, 13. So about right in here. I'm going to start here with, she has kept no record, excuse me, she has kept no sequin costume, no photographs, no flyers or posters. I'll stop that. Sorry. She has kept no sequined costume, no photographs, no flyers or posters from that part of her youth. I would, in fact, tend to think that all memory of double somersaults and heart-stopping catches had left her arms and legs, were it not for the fact that sometimes, here we go, as I sit sewing in the room of the rebuilt house in which I slept as a child, I hear the crackle, catch a whiff of smoke from the stove downstairs, and suddenly the room goes dark. The stitches burn beneath my fingers, and I am sewing with a needle of hot silver, a thread of fire. So she's flashing us back here. She's taking us back to this moment where she is sewing. Remember, this is different than just saying, I remember one time when I was sewing. Okay? We talked about that earlier in the year. She actually takes us back to this moment. Look at the imagery and the word choice she uses here. I hear the crackle. She can smell the smoke. She feels the burn. So all that imagery, that sensory imagery that she's creating for us. When she flashes back, that helps us understand, where she's at in her state of telling the story, where she's at in her emotions. We're getting some characterization of her as well. And I think it's just this beautifully written moment where we experience all of these senses as she takes us back to that moment. She flashes back. Remember, the plot stops. We go back to that moment. That's a flashback. All right, let's go ahead and proceed here. It says, let's look at what techniques are being used to build tension in lines 33 to 43. So remember, that tension in a piece of literature is what really helps build the suspense. We've talked about that. So we have this conflict often happening, which creates this, this tension for us as a reader, that it leads to suspense because we want to know what's going to happen next. That's why we keep reading. That's why we keep watching. That's why we tune into the next episode. In a story, it's why we just keep turning those pages. We want to know. So we're looking for tension here. Remember, that conflict can be internal conflict that the character struggling with on their own, that character, that man versus self, but it can be that external conflict that we've talked about as well. All those factors of external conflict that come into play. Let's look and see what techniques this author used to build tension in lines 33 to 43. So we'll take a look here. If I look at 33 to 43, we're right about here. Okay. I have lived in the West where you can see the weather coming for miles, and it's true that out here we are at something of a disadvantage. When extremes of temperatures collide, a hot and cold front, winds generate instantaneously behind a hill and crash upon you without warning. That, I think, was the likely situation on that day in June. People probably commented on the pleasant air, grateful that no hot sun beat upon the striped tent that stretched over the entire center green. So we have this tension being built here, this conflict, I would say. Well, there's more than one going on, but we have, man versus nature a little bit. Think about the weather. Even in Montana, think about when you watch those clouds come over from the west, or you watch a thunderstorm roll in out through the valley. There's a sense of maybe something ominous might be happening. It's going to really create for us. There's some imagery here. There's some symbolism going on, all those things. So just think about that as you read through here. What else could it be alluding to? What else is she really referencing here? And I want you to be walking through that. If you notice, it says, you can tell she moves back to this moment in time. Again, so she's flashing back to this day in June. And, we're using that technique as well. So she's using more than one as she's working through this. If we look at, I was going to help you here. I don't want to give you all the answers, I guess, but I want you to be thinking about that as you read and come up with your own answers. Okay. Let's talk about characterization, because that's part of your assessment and your questions this week, your analysis. When we have worked before, we talked about the 5 elements of fiction: characters, setting, plot, theme, point of view. Woo! We look at characters, our very first part, that character, how the author creates those characters and characterization. And part of that is, what point of view does the author choose this through? So in our situation here, the point of view, which is helping create characterization, we know it's a first person point of view because she says and she references, I owe my existence, my mother. All those personal pronouns tell us that it's first person. That helps create characterization because now we know that the narrator is the character that this is happening about and that happened to. When the author is creating character, we've talked about dynamic and static. We've also talked about protagonist and antagonist. But let's focus on characterization. This particular piece of literature, she uses characterization to not only help us understand the narrator, but give us a glimpse of this mother so we can feel like we can meet her. Because she's actually critical to what we walk away with in the theme, thinking, learning, or believing that the author wants us to walk away with, that the narrator is teaching us. Remember, the narrator and the author are different. Characterization, let me get rid of my camera so you can read this here. Okay. Characterization happens, there are 3 primary ways that she does it in this particular piece of literature. But there actually are about 4 to 6 ways that an author can create characterization. Here are 4 of the most common. One of the ways is through speech. How does the character talk? Do they have an accent? Can we tell what part of the country they're from, or maybe their age by how they talk? What is their tone as they're speaking? What words do they choose? That's what diction is, remember? So think about, what words are they speaking with? What is the lingo or the slang that they're using? And we can also get a sense of their feelings by how they're talking, their emotions, which helps us understand and create characterization. The next way is through their thoughts. So depending on their point of view, which we know that this is first person point of view, the characters can really teach us, who they are by how they're talking and to themselves. We call that internal monologue, the conversation they're having in their head, or their thought process that the author reveals to us. What are they thinking about? And what are they, trying to show us about these characters by how they're thinking and what they're thinking? The third way is how they act. The characters are revealed to be selfish or generous. They can be shy or outgoing. They might be brave or cowardly, kind or ruthless. There's all these character traits that are being developed by how they act. So how do they react to other characters? How do they treat other characters or the world around them? Any conflict that they might have, in that tension building, rising action leading to the climax. What is happening and how are they responding to those events as the story develops? That tells us a lot about the character, creating characterization. Another way that we often see this developed is through the author's word choice. How do they describe the character? What words do they choose to tell us what they look like? How are they dressing? What is their body language? What are their facial features and expressions? All of those help us really understand our characters. So I think that will help you get through your assignment today, which is in Schoology. And just as a reminder, you go out to Schoology, you click the assignment, which will be your LEAP analysis questions, and you'll copy and paste those into the Create tab. So I just highlight, I copy them, Control C, then I go to Submit, and it will load. I have like a gazillion tabs open. I'll click create, and then you can see it's a document here. And I can start answering those questions. And answering complete sentences. Remember, part of your grade, it does say you use evidence from the selection. So make sure you're doing that. I also have some extra credit that we can offer to you this week. I want you thinking about, let's talk about what the narrator learns. That would be some good extra credit. So if we look at what the narrator's walking away with, so that is, not always the theme, what the author wants us to walk away with, but it definitely helps with that theme, helps us get to the theme often. So let's look at focusing on what do you think the narrator learns? Let's look at lines 227 and 252 for some extra credit here if you're interested. If you're not interested, you can just tune out and go start your assignment. But if you want some extra credit, here is line 227. I'm just going to start right here. A little bit on the last page. Sorry. Okay. I didn't see her leap through air, only heard the sudden thump and looked out my window. She was hanging by the backs of her heels from the new gutter we had put in that year, and she was smiling. I was not surprised to see her. She was so matter of fact. She tapped on the window. I remember how she did it too. It was the friendliest tap, a bit tentative, as if she was afraid she had arrived too early at her friend's house. Then she gestured at the latch, and when I opened the window, she told me to raise it wider and prop it up with the stick so it wouldn't crush her fingers. She swung down, caught the ledge, and crawled through the opening. Once she was in my room, I realized she had on only underclothing, a bra of the heavy stitched cotton women used to wear and step in, laced from drawers. I remember feeling lightheaded, of course, terribly relieved, and then embarrassed for her to be seen by the crowd undressed. I was still embarrassed as we flew out the window toward Earth, me in her lap, her toes pointed as we skimmed toward the painted target of the firefighter's net. I know that she's right. I knew it even then. As you fall, there was time to think. Curled as I was against her stomach, I was not startled by the cries of the crowd or looming faces. The wind roared and beat its hot breath at our back. The flames whistled. I slowly wondered what would happen if we missed the circle or bounced out of it. Then I wrapped my hands around my mother's hands. I felt the brush of her lips and heard the beat of her heart in my ears, loud as thunder, long as the roll of drums. So I want you to think about what the narrator learns there. And for extra credit, I'm going to have you tell me what you think the narrator has learned. All right. Okay. So go ahead and have a fantastic day. I do hope that you get outside and can enjoy some sunshine, get some fresh air. It's good for you. I hope to see you in office hours, so bop in, and I will see you later. Have a great day. Goodbye. Hello again, Honors Group. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time walking through some of the Springboard concepts that we worked on this week, that you worked on this week, that I didn't want to put in the other video just because it didn't pertain to the other classes. You might remember earlier in the year, we had worked through the strategy called a SIFT strategy. We did that when we worked with the Cask of Amontillado and the Gift of the Magi. So we're going to do that again with this piece. The SIFT strategy is something you will continue to use if you stay on the honors track and if you continue into AP Lang and especially in AP Lit. So this is the sheet that you have. So I just want to walk through it briefly. It won't take a bunch of time, but I want you to be thinking about how to sift this passage is what we say. And it is a part of your assignment this week. It's just this last piece of it. So I want you to start with thinking about, is there any symbolism in this piece? Remember, there's not symbolism in everything, and we don't want to make something a symbol when it's not. But oftentimes there is intentional symbolism that the author's created. So if there's a symbol, what details, remember that's that text evidence that you get, that's the proof. Just saying that's a symbol doesn't make it a symbol. Like, what proof do I have that makes it a symbol? Why do I say that that's a symbol? What did the writer, the author, do for me as a reader that made me come to this conclusion that this is a symbol? So what evidence do I have? And then what effect does that have on what's going on in the story or the plot? What meanings, hidden meanings, or other details does it relate to? Or does it help set the tone for, set the pace for in the next event? So think about the effect of that symbol, what it does for the piece of literature. The next part of SIFT, so the S is symbol, the I is imagery. Again, this would be text evidence here. What imagery do I have? Think about the flashback I can think of in the leap that I used about when she goes back to sewing and she can smell and hear and feel. Right? That's imagery. So I want the text evidence of that. And then again, what is the effect? Why is that important? When you're analyzing literature, you're always thinking, so what? Why does this matter? Why did the author use it, or why should the reader care? The F of SIFT is figurative language, and that's all of the different techniques that we've learned about this year. But think if you could find any, maybe there's a simile, there's a metaphor, there might be some onomatopoeia, those sounds. Maybe there's a flashback. Maybe there's some foreshadowing that's working there. Maybe there's repetition. There's might be alliteration where we hear that same sound repeated over and over again. There could be parallelism going through there, the same grammatical structure being repeated over and over again. I also think that sometimes an author, some of the figurative language can be imagery, but since the I of SIFT is imagery, I'd like you just to focus on other figurative language for this particular process. After you finish the F of SIFT, the last one is the T. That's tone or theme. So if the tone, sometimes if it's a poem, it's more of the tone. There's not always a theme coming out of that. So you might sift a poem and come up with the tone. Remember, that's the author's attitude, how they feel about the topic or what they want to deliver to the audience. The theme is usually in a piece of fiction. It can be a nonfiction as well. That's the lesson that we walk away with about life that we can apply to life. So in this particular piece, it would be the theme. And next week's assignment, you're going to write an actual short reflection on theme. For your process today, you're just going to put what the theme is and what the effect is, or what it does for the piece of literature. Next week, you'll write about it. You'll prove that it's the theme. The next part that you're working on in your vocabulary was this analyzing a word. Oftentimes, as you continue through the honors track and you move into your AP classes, you're going to continuously come back to this idea of analyzing words. Words matter. The words you use when you speak, the words you use when you write, and the words that the author uses when we read literature. For this particular task, I just want you practicing how to analyze these words. It's not something that you need to have mastered yet, but I want you to have an introduction to it because you'll continue to do that, I hope, as you move through your educational English career, at least at Helena High, depending on your teacher, but I'm pretty confident you'll see it again. So for this particular piece, just pick a word. You can use one of the bolded words that you didn't go into too much detail with the assignment, or another word that comes out of the passage that might be considered to be some critical vocabulary. Pick a word that you think has some intentionality to it. Of course, not words like the and the pronouns they and me and my, but a word that you think the author has intentionally chosen when they could have chosen something else. Think about what that word means. How else could have they said it? What does that word do for the writing, do for the passage, and what effect does it have on maybe setting the tone or creating the theme or the symbolism or the imagery or all of those? What does it do for the literature and the reader as they're reading it? So that's what I want you thinking about in addition to the other parts of the assignment. As an honor student, you're going to be asked to continually and continuously be thinking, remember, on that deeper level. And so that's what we're going to do this week with these two pieces of our Springboard activities. If you have questions, bop into office hours, shoot me an email. You know that I am easy to find, and I'm usually pretty quick to respond. Okay? Have a great day. Get out there, get some sunshine, call a friend, call a family member, make someone else's day. Okay? Take care. Bye-bye.